Hey guys, George here. Today, I'm going to be covering one of the biggest topics facing us Christians today. Today, I'm going to be talking about what is sin and why should we avoid it at all costs. So, to unpack this big topic, I'm going to be going through 3 points today. So the first point, I'm going to be covering what is sin. The second point, why should we flee sin? And the third point, how do we flee sin? Now, before I get into this, I'm going to paint a picture, tell a story, a little teaser on how we should flee sin. Now, back when I was working at a service station, a man came up to me, and now he was covered in Bulldogs memorabilia, completely from head to toe. The jersey, shorts, and a hat. He even went so far as to have a tattoo on his arm saying, "04 Dogs, the last time the Bulldogs won a premiership." Now I asked him, why? Why would you go so far as to tattoo on yourself 04 Dogs? And he said to me, it's because every time I look down and I see the Bulldogs not playing well, which is a lot nowadays, I remind myself why I'm a Bulldogs fan in the first place. And now you might be thinking, what does this have to do with sin? Now, this actually has a lot to do with how we should fight sin. But I'll reveal that later as we go into our talk. But first, on to my first point. If sin is so bad, then we need to know what it is. So what is it then? Sin is where we reject God. It's where we want our own way. It's saying that we are the kings and God is not the king. It is breaking and disobeying what the Lord has commanded us. As it says in 1 John 3:4, everyone who sins breaks the law. In fact, sin is lawlessness. And the thing is, we all sin. We all go the way of ourselves. In this cursed world, we go and we choose what we want all the time. And once we sin, we are cut off from the relationship with God. Now this is bad. This is seriously bad. But thankfully, thank God we have Christ, who took the punishment for our sin, instead of us having to bear the punishment, which is permanent separation from God's love. Now you may think to yourself, wow, that's awesome. Sin's done. I don't need to care anymore since Jesus has taken it away from me. But this is a trap. This is such a dangerous trap. And so this leads to my second point. Why should we avoid sin? Well, if we fall into this common "she'll be right" attitude, we'll become complacent. So imagine it like this. Picture yourself walking on a footpath, right? And there is a massive pothole in the middle of it. Now, obviously you're not going to fall into it if you know you're paying attention, but that's the thing about complacency. If you're texting and you're just walking, you're not looking where you're going, and you're going to fall right into that hole. Now, this is what happens when we don't flee sin. We fall into forgetting who God is, and we fall away. We become consumed by it. Now, you see, it all connects. I mean, that's what sin is. It's disobeying the will of God, right? The definition of sin is being cut off from God. So if you think about it then, why wouldn't it be logical is that if we continually sin, we're going to lose the sight of God? That's when we eventually become cut off. It's when we sin more and more and we stop having faith. We start to live a life that is against everything God set us for. We become, like from our last talk, like the Israelites. We live life that's sin, pleasing only ourselves. And this is so hard to climb out. So hard to climb out that hole once we fall in. It's almost impossible. We really do need to flee sin. It is so important that we acknowledge this. And so that leads then to our final point. How do we do this? Especially when ourselves, being humans, are so prone to sinning. Well, if we look back at the book of Numbers, we see what God has commanded the Israelites on how to avoid sin. So coming up on the screen right now, as I read from Numbers 15:37-41, the Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, through the generations to come, you are to make tassels on the corners of your garment, with a blue cord on each tassel. You'll have these tassels to look at, and so you'll remember all the commandments of the Lord, that you may obey them and not prostitute yourself by chasing after the lusts of your own heart and eyes. Then you will remember and obey all my commands, and you'll be consecrated to your God. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God." And that's how we avoid sin. It's all there in that passage. Now, does this sound familiar? This is the same drastic step as the Bulldog fan took to remind himself of his loyalty to the Bulldogs. And this is the same drastic step that the Israelites took. You might think that would be weird to make tassels out of your hair, but that's how far they went to remind themselves of how much God did for them and how much they should go to flee sin. And in all honesty, that is a sort of step we need to take to flee sin. Now, not necessarily saying you have to make tassels out of your hair or to tattoo O4 dogs or to tattoo yourself, but it's so important that we always focus and remind ourselves that indeed we need to flee sin. So look at yourselves. Look at some examples. Take some drastic actions as to prevent yourself from sinning. Ask yourself, are you struggling with sin? And if so, how are you going to stop? Every time you sin, remind yourself how much Jesus has done for you, how much he loves you, and put an active effort to change. If you're struggling with your computer screens, turn it off, close it. If you're struggling with social media, cut it off, get rid of it. Don't let yourself be distracted, especially in these times of isolation. Is so important. Flee sin, run to God, for it is the only way through him that we have righteousness and salvation.